Jana, are you here with us? Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so happy to be with you guys.
I'm honored to be with you. Thanks so much. We met on Clubhouse before, and I was also honored to hear you speak. So thanks so much for joining.
Of course, I'm extremely happy to be with you.
Excellent. So I think we can start. I'll speak a bit about the format of the session in a few moments. But before that, I would like to give an introduction to the topic. Can we start? I think I have with me my colleague Abdullah, who's managing the technical side of the session. Okay, we're starting. I will sleep on the street. Ruqayya al-Nassar, who's 9 years old, told the reporter as he was interviewing her right after the municipality of the occupation ordered her family to self-demolish their house in Silwan. She answered that and then went to her father to hug and comfort him as he was crying, while as he was seeing his dreams, his life, and all his memories shatter before his eyes. We bought the clothes of Eid, but we never were able to enjoy them. I am scared of the sounds of the missiles. This was said by Ayat al-Attar, who's 8 years old, as she was also being interviewed right after the bombardment in Gaza in May of this year. My mom is my Eid. She has been taken away from me for 6 years now, so far. Mu'tasim, who's the son of Isra al-Ja'abis, he's 12 years old, was telling that to the world in July of this year. The story of Uday al-Haddad is a little bit different. He's 9 years old, who was summoned on the 4th of July of this year to go to the police station for an investigation. Muhammad al-Durra was 11 years old when he was murdered in cold blood in the year 2000 in Gaza, while his father was holding him and begging the soldiers to stop the shooting. Iman Hajjo was 4 months old in 2001 when she was murdered in her mother's lap in Khan Yunis bombardment. Iman would have been 20 years old now, perhaps finishing her studies in the university. She could have been a lawyer, a doctor, or perhaps a maths teacher, just like my father, who was 7 years old when he was ethnically cleansed from Tulkarem in 1967. I'm Asil Barouk, just another Palestinian in exile, and I'm honored to be with you here this evening to facilitate this session about childhood under the occupation. First of all, before I explain to you the format of the session, I'd like to welcome our guest speakers. I'm not sure if Dr. Norman has arrived or not yet. So we have with us Dr. Norman Finkelstein, who's an American political scientist, activist, an author, and a former professor. We have with us Mr. Edward. I hope they have joined already. I'll check in a bit. If not, I'll reintroduce them once we give the mic to them. We have Mr. Edward Joseph, who is a foreign policy specialist, writer, lecturer, and a field practitioner who has served in some of the toughest locations in the world. We have also with us Dr. John Quigley, who's the President's Club Professor of Law at the Moritz College of Law at the Ohio State University. We have with us, I'm a huge fan, Miss Jana Tamimi, a Palestinian youth activist and an amateur journalist. And we have Miss Manar Al-Amle, who's an international advocacy officer at Defense for Children International Organization. And last but definitely not least, we have Mr. Ayed Abu Qtaish, who's an accountability program director who has been working for DCI Palestine since the year 2000. The format of the session will be as the following. I will be passing the mic over to each speaker and I'll tell you a little bit about the topic that they will be talking about, or I'll be asking them some questions perhaps, and they will be answering us. Each speaker will have around 10 minutes to deliver their speech. And of course, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type the questions onto the chat box, and we'll try as much as possible to answer all the questions that we receive. Thank you so much once again for everybody for joining. What I will do, I will move to Mr. Ayed, if that's okay with you. Are you okay with that, Mr. Ayed?
Yes, indeed, of course.
Yes, okay. You will be talking to us about children arrest within international legal context. You will tell us about children's rights in international law and how to use the various mechanisms to protect children's rights under occupation. The mic is yours. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to brief you about the situation facing Palestinian children under occupation. I'll try in my presentation to talk about the daily life of Palestinian children and the organization work in order to support Palestinian children. I'll start by talking a little bit about the Organization Dci Palestine, especially in this challenging situation after the Israeli authorities designated the organization as a terrorist organization, and it was outlawed, despite the fact that the organization is affiliated to international movement. Around the world, there are 40 sections, and each section develops its programs and activities according to particular need in each community. In Palestine, we work through two main programs. One deals with the rights of Palestinian children under the jurisdiction of the Israeli occupation, and the other one deals with the rights of Palestinian children under the jurisdiction of the Palestinian Authority. So the first program, it consists of which we call accountability program of three main units. The first one, it's monitoring and documentation unit, where we document the rights of Palestinian children, mainly their right to life and their right to be free from ill treatment, or their right to liberty. For example, during the period between 2000 and now, we documented the killing of 2,200 Palestinian children on the hands of the Israeli occupation forces and Israeli settlers. Also, we concentrate on documenting the right to liberty. Every year, the Israeli authorities arrest and prosecute 700 Palestinian children in the Israeli military legal system, and all Palestinian children who are arrested and prosecuted in the Israeli military legal system exposed to different types of ill treatment and torture. So our role is to provide legal services for the Palestinian children who are arrested by the Israeli authorities through the legal service in the Israeli military legal system, despite the fact that we believe that it lacks fair trial guarantees, and all Palestinian children who pass through this system exposed to different types of ill treatment and torture. In addition to that, we document the violation to Palestinian children's rights. All Palestinian children inform us that they exposed to ill treatment and torture, and during the past period, we noticed that the Israeli authorities use more psychological methods of pressure in order to extract confession from Palestinian children. In relation to the right to life, almost all Palestinian children, or the majority of Palestinian children who were killed during the past 20 years, they were killed, 2/3 of them from Gaza Strip, especially during the Israeli military invasion and assault against Gaza Strip. For example, during the last military assault that took place in May this year, we documented the killing of 60 Palestinian children who were killed during the 11th day of assault. During the during the assault in 2014, we documented the killing of 550 Palestinian children. What's important in this regard, that the Israeli military tactics that Israel used during these military invasions do not abide with the Israeli obligation under international humanitarian law, mainly the principle of distinction, principle of proportionality and necessity, and the military tactics that Israel use, like Hannibal Directive or Dahya Doctrine, it's in contradiction with its legal obligations under international humanitarian law. For example, Israel used Dahya Doctrine, which means that they open fire in a very intensive way towards civilian areas, and this inevitably led to the killing of civilians, among them Palestinian children. And this military tactic, in order to put pressure on civilians, in order for the civilians to put pressure on militant group in order to surrender. And the other tactic, it's Hannibal Directive. And usually Israel use this or activate this directive whenever there is an attempt to arrest an Israeli soldier by Palestinian militant group. So when there is an attempt for arresting or capturing an Israeli soldier, and this directive activated, regardless of the number of bullets among civilians, here I mean Palestinian civilians, and even if it led to the killing of the Israeli soldier himself. Because for Israel, a killed soldier is better than arrested soldier, because Israel do not want to find itself in a situation where they have to bargain and negotiate with Palestinian militant group in order to make a prisoner swap. And this clarifies the importance of the issue of prisoners and arresting Palestinians in the mentality of the Israeli state as a measure of controlling Palestinians who are living under occupation. Here it's important also to note that Israel is almost a state party to all core human rights conventions. But when it comes to the right of Palestinians who are living under occupation, Israel argue that these conventions do not abide or do not implemented for people who are living under occupation. What is implemented is the international humanitarian law and also the humanitarian aspect of the international humanitarian law, not the legal aspect, without clarifying what humanitarian aspect entails. So Israel is picking and choosing when it comes to international humanitarian law. For example, Israel justified the establishment of the Israeli military legal system or the Israeli military courts because the international humanitarian law gives them the right to establish military courts. But when it comes to the rights or the issue of settlement or settlers, Israel do not believe in international humanitarian law. So Israel is dealing with this issue in they pick and choose whatever in their interest, and they forget about any issues in these conventions when it contradicts its interest. So the issue of child prisoners, it's a very important issue, or prisoners in general, in the strategy of Israel in controlling Palestinians who are living under occupation. As I mentioned, every year Israel arrested and prosecuted around 700 Palestinian children in the Israeli military legal system. And during the past period, there was mounting international criticism to the Israeli practices against Palestinian children in the Israeli military legal system. So Israel did some modifications to the military legal system that gives the impression that Israel is doing something good for the rights of Palestinian children in the Israeli military legal system, while in fact the situation is the same. For example, until the year 2009, there was 2 ages for criminal or the age of majority, one applicable to Palestinian children who are living under occupation, and one it's applicable to Israeli children. The one which is applicable for Palestinians, it was 16. The other one, which is applicable to Israeli children, it was 18. So it was very easy for anybody to show discrimination or the discrimination that Israel practices against Palestinians through giving this simple example. So what Israel did, they raised the age of majority from 16 to 18 without giving Palestinian children any new rights. The other amendment to the Israeli military legal system, it was related to the establishment of the Juvenile Military Court. In the year 2011, the Israeli authorities established the Israeli Military Juvenile Court, but since that time, we are monitoring the conduct of that court, and we came to the conclusion that the Israeli military court, it's like the military juvenile court because it operates according to the same military orders, the same judges, the same premises, everything is the same, but they introduce it as a development that Israel did in order to protect the rights of Palestinian children and to deal with them differently. The problem now that in addition to targeting civilians, Israel at this point, they are targeting the organization that are protecting the rights of civilians, and also the organization that try to expose the Israeli practices against children and against Palestinian civilians through outlawing this organization. In October, Israel outlawed 6 Palestinian human rights organizations in order to cut Palestinians from international solidarity and support. Thank you.
Mr. Aid, in specific, I want to ask you, I want to build on what you have just, the sentence that you have just finished with regards to the designation of the civil society organizations. How does that affect the work of DCI in specific, and how would that impact the support that they provide to Palestinian children? If you have any comments on that.
Right now, we are operating as usual because we regard that this decision, it's arbitrary. So we are documenting the Israeli violation to Palestinian children's rights. We are continuing in advocating and exposing these practices, but in the future, it may activate this military order, and the Israeli Minister of the Defense decision, and they may arrest staff members of the organization or confiscate its assets or preventing us from receiving international donations. So we do not know exactly how what the future may bring us.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Mr. Muqtesh.
let's just take the recent history. Let's take Operation Cast Lead, 2007 to 8, Operation Pillar of Defense, 2012, Operation Protective Edge, 2014, the Great March of Return, beginning March 2018. In the course of each of these, what Israel calls operations, I think the gentleman has disappeared, so I'm not sure if I should continue.
No, I'd like you, Dr. Finkelstein, to continue if that's okay with you.
Okay. In the course of these operations, there have been many human rights reports deploring what Israel did. There have been verbal condemnations in the Human Rights Council by special rapporteurs, by the General Assembly, but accountability, so far as I know, in the case of Operation Cast Lead, in which 350 children were killed, 6,000 homes destroyed, there were 3 Israelis who were held accountable for stealing a credit card. Operation Protective Edge, 550 Palestinian children were killed, 18,000 homes were destroyed. There were 3 Israelis held accountable for stealing $300 or $600. I can't remember right now. That's all the accountability. Has a single Israeli leader been prosecuted? Has a single Israeli soldier been criminally convicted? What that gentleman is saying is complete nonsense. There's no country in the world that can carry on with such impunity as the state of Israel. Israel has imposed on Gaza, now it's true, Yemen suffers now from a terrible blockade. And I'm not going to deny, I'm not going to diminish the magnitude of suffering being experienced by the Yemeni people or the Syrian people. However, in the case of Gaza, you have a population which since 1948, because you have to remember, 70% of the people of Gaza are refugees under international law. So we have to go back to when they became refugees in 1948. So we're not talking about really an interval of time. We're talking about 70 years now. If you want to go back to the origins of 70% of the people of Gaza, their children, grandchildren, and probably now great-grandchildren of refugees. So you're talking about 70 years of refugeedom, and then compounded by a medieval blockade that's been imposed since 2006, since January 2006. I don't want to get into the technicalities, but it's incorrect to say it began with a Hamas takeover, what they call the takeover in 2007. It began with the election of Hamas in January 2006, the blockade of Gaza. So you're talking about protracted periods of time. Yemen, it's now several years, it's true. But we're talking about 7 decades for 70% of the people of Gaza who are classified as refugees. We're talking about since 2006, which is already nearly 15 years of an illegal, immoral blockade of Gaza with complete, total impunity. There is zero accountability by Israel. This notion of accountability, 3 people who served time for stealing a credit card, 3 people who served time for stealing some cash, that's accountability. This is not serious, what he's saying. He's so smothered by Israeli propaganda that he dares say that hospitals are not attacked in Gaza. Now, I respect different people have different areas of expertise, and he was very generous in acknowledging his ignorance in this particular area, which is, I think, an admirable thing to do, not to be a windbag. But then he goes ahead and says preposterous statements like Israel doesn't attack hospitals. I mean, there are voluminous human rights reports documenting Israel's targeting of hospitals, Israel's targeting of ambulances, Israel's targeting of medical personnel. For example, during the Great March of Return in 2018. And in the face of this voluminous documentation, he says Israel doesn't attack hospitals. Okay, agreed. Not everybody has to be knowledgeable about everything. But you don't make statements like that. If you're not knowledgeable, then you should simply say, I don't know. But to first be smothered by the propaganda and then to disseminate the propaganda, to act as a propaganda apparatus for Israel, it's really appalling.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Dr. Finstein. We will be moving now to Jana, Miss Jana Tamimi, who will be telling us about the impact of detention on children. Jana, are you still with us?
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. I'm actually happy to be with you today. I love the discussion. I could literally add a lot, especially considering the fact that I am a Palestinian child that lives under the Israeli occupation and under this apartheid settler colonial regime that is affecting my life every day. Yeah, my name is Jana Jihad and I'm 15 years old. I live in the village of Nabi Saleh in Palestine. I'm a journalist and an advocate for Palestinian children's rights around the world. Living under the Israeli occupation is, of course, not easy. And living under the Israeli occupation means your life is literally affected from every single aspect you could possibly imagine. Just due to the fact that you're a Palestinian, you're considered as a second-class citizen, you're discriminated against, and that causes your rights to be violated. That causes your life to not be normal, your childhood to be violated from you as a child. And the Israeli occupation violates most, if not all, of our rights. I mean, we could look and, talk about so many of our experiences and so many stories of Palestinian children where they face the violation of their rights on a daily basis. We get our right to education violated, our right to movement, our right to literally just feel safe in our own houses, our rights to health, and the list can literally just go on. I mean, if I just can give like brief examples on some of these rights that are violated. The right to education, which is something that shouldn't even be talked about. It should be given to every single human human being on this earth. They should be given their right to education. They should be able to go to their schools, be able to learn, be able to think of a future. But as a Palestinian child, you are restricted and you are put in a box. You have boundaries and limits to all of these dreams. On our ways to our schools, we face several checkpoints on our way, restricting our movement. I personally faced 2 checkpoints that, and these checkpoints, let's say they're not even checkpoints, the Israeli checkpoints that are put on the entrances of most, if not all, Palestinian villages are literally blockades where the Israeli occupation forces just block the street. You're not allowed to get in or get out. And for me, instead of me reaching my school, which is in Ramallah, which is 30 minutes away maximum from Nabi Saleh, if there were no checkpoints, I would have to take a whole other route that takes me up to 3 hours sometimes to reach my school. And that is if there is not another checkpoint or another blockade on that street that would just not allow me to go to my school at all. Even when I reach my school, I'm usually late. I miss a lot of my classes. In a lot of schools, my friends' schools, they always tell me about what happens in the school in Nabi Saleh, or my friends from Nablus tell me what usually happens in their schools. The Israeli occupation forces attack schools so many times in Nabi Saleh, whenever the Israeli occupation would raid the village, because of course they can do whatever they want, and it's just normal raids with no, actual or a justifiable reason. They usually attack schools during when the school day, when the Palestinian children are in their schools. They would start shooting at the schools. Gas canisters would be shot inside the schools when the children are taking classes. Several children have been even arrested from inside their schools. The Israeli occupation forces would raid the schools, arrest the child from their class, from their schools, and that is also justified by the Israeli law, because we as Palestinian children are not considered to be normal children. We actually fall under the Israeli military law, which states that if you're a Palestinian child, you're 12 years old or over 12, you can get arrested, interrogated, treated like a criminal for no reason, or sometimes for just defending your land, your house, your rights, yourself. And so many children, even under 12. My cousin Samir was arrested at 11 years old. A child in Hebron yesterday was arrested at 10 years old. These children get arrested. They are taken to police centers, interrogated alone for several hours a day, put in solitary confinement. They are forced to sign papers that would press charges on them in Hebrew, which is a language they don't understand. They're not allowed to have a lawyer or a parent in these interrogations. They are put in solitary confinement, put in jail, not allowed to get visitors. Their families are not allowed to visit them. They're not allowed to call their families. So many of my friends that have gotten arrested, my cousins who have gotten arrested, we literally just lost communication with them for weeks when they're in the interrogation center, because we are not privileged enough to literally just call our children and know where they are, what's happening with them. Palestinian children during the arrests, of course, most of their rights are violated during the arrest. They can get arrested for no charges and get arrested for stupid charges that could be just literally, they're not stupid. I wouldn't call them stupid. They're just charges that shouldn't be exactly illegal. Some Palestinian children got arrested for posting something on social media that is literally just them filming an Israeli soldier raiding their house. Some people have gotten arrested for participating in a peaceful demonstration or marching. During these arrests, Palestinian children get tortured in so many different ways. Of course, physically, a lot of illegal ways of torture internationally, get Palestinian children and Palestinian people get subjected to. And of course, mentally. I could, of course, tell you guys examples if you want later. But yeah, so also they violate so many international laws based on that. They violate our rights as Palestinian children doing all that. And that's just the right to, you know, be able to go to school or be able to get a normal education. We have so many other rights that are violated. Our right to move, as I said, now during winter, Palestinian children, so many Palestinian children are refugees. We have over 8 million Palestinian refugees that have been forcefully displaced out of their houses in 1948 and 1967, and are still being forcefully displaced, this is an ongoing catastrophe that has been ongoing since 1948 till now. Palestinian children and Palestinian families are being kicked out of their houses, and these Palestinian families are becoming refugees. And just imagine the lives of these refugees right now in Palestine. It's winter, it's literally freezing. I'm like wearing gloves in the house. So imagine these Palestinian children that have no houses, or the Palestinian children in Jericho that are their houses are threatened at any moment to be demolished just because it's built in Area C, which is an area that is in the West Bank, which is supposedly the land for Palestinians, but it's, of course, being annexed all the time to build illegal Israeli settlements on our houses, or build the apartheid walls that separate us from our people. And yeah, so these people are always under constant threats to become refugees. The people in Sheikh Jarrah, in Jerusalem, in Silwan, everywhere in Palestine. In Gaza, I mean, you guys mentioned the fact that, I mean, Palestinian schools get demolished in Gaza, Palestinian hospitals have gotten demolished in Gaza. Our right to health is also getting taken away from us. Palestinian children that are suffering due to health issues in Gaza because they're under siege because of the Israeli occupation that, you know, since Gaza is the largest open air prison all over the world, Palestinians in Gaza are not allowed to go in or outside Gaza, you know, without an extremely painful or extremely hard, you know, things and stuff that they have to go through. So Palestinian children that are facing extremely hard medical stuff and are, you know, they need urgent medical care. They are unable to get out of Gaza to get medical, to you know, just go to other hospitals, because the hospitals in Gaza are not allowed to get, you know, basic machines or basic stuff that they need for their hospitals. And sometimes there are so many Palestinian children that have been able to get out of Gaza for how critical their situation is, but their parents were not allowed to get out of Gaza with them. So imagine a 5-year-old who has cancer or like an extremely hard medical condition, who is in a hospital under constant operations and going through surgeries and so many stuff, but they don't have their mom by their side to hold their hand or to tell them stories at night or anyone to hug them, or you know, these basic stuff that we don't exactly think about are the stuff that truly affect the Palestinian children. The right to feel safe in our own houses. I never feel safe in my own house because I, as a Palestinian child, I cannot be protected by my parent, or I am not protected by anyone just because I'm a Palestinian. An Israeli occupation, an Israeli soldier can just come and raid my house at the moment and kill me, literally kill me, and never be held accountable for it. And it happened so many times. So many Palestinian children get arrested and killed from their houses. We never feel safe. We are never protected. And the people who violate our rights and kill us and violate even our right to life, which is the most basic human right that's violated from us, they never get held accountable, or held accountable, but in extremely non-accountable way, literally just, you know, not being held or being held accountable by, you know, going into prison for like 1 month or something, which is like literally 1 in like 1,000 cases. And since also this is, an English organization in Britain, I'm also going to talk about that. I think calling on the people of Britain, and of course, not only the people of Britain, but the people of the whole entire world, to actually, do their duty in standing up for the Palestinian rights and the Palestinian children, and standing up against this apartheid settler colonial regime that is being practiced, against the ethnic cleansing, against the genocides, against the basic stuff that every single human being that at least has a dot of humanity left in their hearts should stand against. It's your duty to stand up against that now, because England was the one to pass the Balfour Declaration that gave the Israeli Zionists the right to kick Palestinians out of their houses and literally take over a land with no people, for people with no land. But Palestine is a land for people. We are native to Palestine. We have been in Palestine for thousands of years, and hopefully we will stay in Palestine because it is our land. So I call on every single human, any free human in this world, to stand up and do your duty and do the works that you should have been working on since literally 1948. But it's being late is better than not doing them ever. So I call on you to unite, because I believe that we are actually the generation of change, because we don't compromise, we don't give up. We have so much energy, and I believe we should use that to hopefully reach our aim of collective liberation, to liberate Palestine, to give the Palestinian refugees and the Palestinian children that are in refugee camps all over the world the right to return to Haifa, to Jaffa, to Ramallah, to Jenin, everywhere in Palestine. Collective liberation, because when we liberate Palestine, it is the first step to end all forms of injustices in the world, forms of poverty, so forms of the systems that are violating people's rights. And without the liberation of Palestine, we won't be able to do that. So hopefully we can together dismantle all these unjust systems, and put an end to this ethnic cleansing and to this form of settler colonialism by the Zionists in Palestine. Thank you.
Are you able to hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you a lot for the fantastic speech. I just have one follow-up question to you, Mr. Mimi, which is, can you describe to us the situation or the scene that made you, that triggered you into starting to document what's happening around you, if you recall?
Right. I've been living my whole life under occupation. I've been living my whole life in Palestine, in Nabi Saleh. I was born in 2006, and Nabi Saleh, as I said, I was living in Nabi Saleh my whole life. Nabi Saleh is an extremely small village in the West Bank, close to Ramallah, and also surrounded by Israeli settlements and, Israeli checkpoints, etc. We have Israeli illegal settlement that is expanding by annexing more and more of our lands, called Halmich, which is actually one of the biggest Israeli illegal settlements built in the West Bank. It was, the settlement at a certain point in 2009, they annexed our main source of water, which is Ain al-Qus, which means the spring of the rainbow, and that was the main source of water for the people of Nabi Saleh. And when they annexed that source of water, of course, the Israeli occupation annexes most of our natural resources and controls all of them. So when they took over that, we as the Palestinians that were in Nabi Saleh, we only got 12 hours of water a week, and then the Israeli illegal settlers that are in our lands, annexed lands, that are only literally one street away from us, we're getting 24 hours of water a day and paying 3 times less of the price that we had to pay for 12 hours of water a week. So the Palestinians in Nabi Saleh decided to start their weekly demonstrations. And I mean, I was born into an activist family. I've been my whole life just, you know, listening to the stories of my grandma and my grandpa that were deported to Jordan due to their activism, etc. So when the demonstrations started in Nabi Saleh against, you know, the annexing of our lands, against the occupation in general, my family used to go to these demonstrations, but I was always super scared. And I used to stay in the house with my grandma. But at a certain point when I was 5, that was in 2011, one of my friends, my friend Mustafa, he's actually like our cousin, but that like he's older than us, but like he was like the best person in the family. He would literally take us, the children, to the supermarket all the time, play with us, you know, carry us. We literally loved Mustafa so much. But in 2012, during one of the weekly demonstrations, the Israeli occupation forces would raid the village from like 8 a.m., stay and suppress the protesters that would protest at like 12 p.m., something around that. And then they would leave the village at night at 8 p.m. So it was like around 7 or something, and like the Israeli occupation forces were just gonna leave the village. Me, Rand, Samer, Hamoude, which are my friends, we were on the mountain, which is like in the middle of the village. The village is extremely small, and the mountain falls right on the main street. So we were collecting flowers, or I don't know what we were doing, but then we heard someone saying that someone got injured from the main street. So we all ran down the mountain to literally see Mustafa laying on the floor with blood all over his face. We were holding his hand. Blood was all over everywhere on the street, and we saw Mustafa taking his last breaths. It was extremely hard on us. We loved Mustafa, and his blood was like on the street for several days after that. And the Friday after that, something literally broke in me. Like I had so many feelings. I was so angry. I was so sad. I missed Mustafa. I was like, with the Israeli occupation forces raided at my house the week after, it was actually my first time standing up to them and telling them like, why did you kill Mustafa and all that. And then a year after, my uncle Rushdie got killed, I also witnessed that. And then a year after the murder of my uncle Rushdie, I was just trying to figure a way out to try at least to send the feelings that I felt to the world. So I just took my mother's phone during one of the Fridays and started filming. And I think like 3 Fridays after that, my mom found 4 videos on her phone of me reporting what was going on. And you would just like see my face, and I would have the protesters behind me. And we would like, in the videos, you would see the Palestinians holding flags and singing and chanting, and then the Israeli occupation forces suppressing them. And I would show the types of chemical weapons that they were using, gas canisters, pepper sprays, so many other forms of weapons that were being shot on us. So yeah, after that, we just posted them, and then a lot of people were like, we never knew that actually happens in Palestine. So that was a way that I started, and I was 7 years old, and I, you know, thank God I found a way to actually send my message to the world, which is technically just very similar, or it is the same message of all Palestinian children, the message that we just want a normal life and without occupation.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jana. Thanks for being here with us. We're honored to have you and to hear about your personal story. If you are still with us, Dr. Finkelstein. I'm not sure if you're here. Please go ahead. The mic is yours. Thank you.
Okay, I'm a little bit short on time. I thought we were going from 1 to 2 o'clock and I would be at the end, but it's already now 2:20 in New York, so I have a conflict of appointments. Let me try to be succinct and hopefully make a contribution. There are many ways to look at the current situation. One of your guests, I guess, conveyed the most depressing sides of the situation. Yes, it's true that Israel is less isolated now publicly in certain parts of the Arab world. I'm not sure I would count its relations with the UAE as a major diplomatic achievement. The UAE is obviously not a country. It's a family-owned gas station, as are most of the so-called states in the Gulf. But it does represent the fact that there has been a certain realignment, at least publicly, formally, between Israel and states and pseudo-states in parts of the Arab world. And one shouldn't be oblivious to those facts. One shouldn't pretend they're not there. Let me just say, broadly speaking, the picture is complex now politically. There are, I think, opportunities, which I will get to presently. And the most important point I would want to convey to the listeners, especially the young people, I'm an old timer. I'm on my way out, and some of your guests are, including I guess the host, are on their way up. They're beginning life's journey. They're not at the end of it. And so my piece of general advice is everybody makes errors. We make errors in our personal life. We make errors in our public life, and we also make errors in our political life. So to have committed, to have been in error is no shame, certainly not a sin, but it is a shame and it is a sin if you don't learn from the errors. And the most important thing is to study situations in order to understand what went wrong, and then to learn from what went wrong, also to study and learn from what went right, which is equally important. So let me make having said that as a general comment, let me make some specific comments about the Israel-Palestine conflict in recent years. First of all, there's a lot of unpredictability in the conflict. Politics is not rocket science, and it's very hard to predict what will happen tomorrow. A few months before the second election, it seemed certain that Trump was going to be reelected president of the United States. And Biden didn't seem to have, Joseph Biden didn't seem to have a snowball's chance in hell. It was going to be an easy victory for Trump. And then along came COVID. Out of nowhere, COVID suddenly emerged, and the economy tanked. And what seemed to be a certain Trump victory, because of his own self-inflicted wounds in trying to deny the COVID, he lost. Who could have predicted that? I follow politics very closely. Nobody predicted that. Who could have predicted COVID? Let's take the case of Israel-Palestine. In March 2018 began the Great March of Return in Gaza. March 30th, 2018 began the Great March of Return in Gaza. It was mass, nonviolent civil resistance. Everybody was talking about for many, many years, where's the new Palestinian Intifada? Where's the new Palestinian Intifada? Well, lo and behold, there it was, mass, nonviolent civil resistance. It was completely ignored. The first few days it got some coverage. Then there was a large-scale massacre, I think it was in May 13th or 14th. But apart from that, it was almost totally ignored. There were no demonstrations of solidarity. There were no demonstrations of solidarity in the United States, not even places where you might expect demonstrations of solidarity, like in New York. There was no solidarity in the West Bank. It was completely ignored, the Great March of Return. So at that point, it looked like, and the Great March of Return itself gradually fizzled out. At that point, it looked like the Palestine struggle was dead. If you couldn't even evoke solidarity in the midst of this mass nonviolent civil resistance, where Israel had their snipers on the Gaza border just targeting these kids and adults. If you read the human rights reports, they say accurately, in my opinion, Israel was targeting children. It was targeting disabled people. it was targeting medical personnel, and it was targeting journalists. And notwithstanding, there was, as I said, no solidarity. And then along comes May 2020. May 2020, actually, formally, I don't agree with it, but formally Israel had a case because it was Hamas who began the projectile attacks on Israel after the assault by the Israeli troops on Al-Aqsa Mosque. But you could say it was unprovoked. I don't agree with it, but there was an argument. Notwithstanding the fact that it could be looked at as an unprovoked Hamas attack. Again, I don't agree with it, but it could be looked at that way. There was huge solidarity. It was actually a breathtaking scene around the world during those 10 days, May 10th to May 20th, 2020. It was a quite inspiring, almost exhilarating scene. Of course, it was young people, mostly it was young people in their early 20s who were out in solidarity with the Palestinians in Gaza. There was also the unexpected civil revolt in Israel, not seen since 2000, against the Israeli attack on Gaza. There was some resistance in the West Bank, though not as much as one would have hoped during the Israeli attack on Gaza. So totally unpredictable. And after the Great March of Return, it seemed like the cause was dead. And suddenly it lit up again like a fire in May 2020. It's true, as that guest said, it's true that Israel is less isolated in parts of the Arab world. That's half the reality. But I think the other half of the reality is Israel has never been more isolated in terms of public opinion and progressive public opinion in the Western world and Europe at the public opinion level, not at the political level, but at the public opinion level. And you could see it in the fact that Human Rights Watch, which is a mainstream human rights organization, just before the events of May 2020, roughly around April 2020, Human Rights Watch released a devastating report that said Israel practices apartheid in the occupied Palestinian territories. And the report effectively, if you read it closely, it effectively delegitimized the whole Israeli project from the get-go, from 1948, because it was based on ethnic cleansing and illegal confiscation of land. So there's that UAE Gulf development, which we shouldn't be oblivious of, but there's also the fact that public opinion has radically shifted in the West. I can speak with some authority in the United States, among the population in general, and among American Jews in particular. So there's, to put it simply, there are grounds for pessimism and there are grounds for optimism. What do you do in a situation like this? What are the possibilities? Well, there's one range of possibilities which Professor Quigley outlined, and that's both basically at the legal level. There is the case pending now in the International Criminal Court. It's hard for an outsider to gauge what's happening there because the International Criminal Court is not really a court. It's not a court of law. It's a very politicized body and responds to political pressures. It doesn't respond, in my opinion, it doesn't respond really to legal argument per se. It's simply a plaything of political forces. And there's the question of what will be the calculation, the political calculation. What will be the political calculation of the chief prosecutor? And ordinary people can intervene in some ways, but it's very hard to predict where things are headed there. As for us, people who aren't in positions of power and don't have really, who aren't in positions of power, I would say my advice is you have to examine what went wrong in the Great March of Return. Why didn't it succeed? Why wasn't it able to galvanize public opinion in, say, the way that the first Intifada of 1987, no one gives a date when it ended, but basically it ended with the Oslo Agreement of September 1993. What went wrong in the Great March of Return? We have to analyze that. We have to sit down and figure out, why did that strategy, mass nonviolent civil resistance, why did it fail to inspire, galvanize public opinion? Then on the other hand, we have to analyze what went right, or why did things go right in May 2020 during the last Israeli assault on Gaza.
Thank you so much, Dr. Finkelstein. It was a pleasure having you here. Thank you for staying with us until this hour. We really appreciate it, and we hope to see you in future sessions. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm going to move back to Jenna, if she's still with us. Jenna, are you still with us?
Yes, I'm here.
I would like you to please give us the closing remarks for this session before we close it, if that's okay with you.
Yeah. Of course, I'm extremely happy and honored to be with you guys today. And hopefully we can all, look more into the action side of the story rather than just talking, and, talking about of course, raising awareness is extremely important, but also the action side of all that is extremely important. And of course, I would just like to add up to highlight the fact that we should all resist this occupation and resist every single form of injustice and every single form of colonization all around the world, because resistance can come in so many different ways, and we should resist them to be able to hopefully create a better world, a world where there's justice, where there's freedom, where there's children that get their rights, and hopefully we can do that with this new generation. I would love to talk more about the new generation, but a lot of you guys are old, so so I'm very happy to
take that as a compliment, Zana.
Of course,
we'll take that
yeah,
as a compliment.
Because look, it's a compliment and it's a bad thing, but not a bad thing as an age, but a bad thing to the fact where we are right now politically. But I'm very honored and happy to be able to learn more about what you guys think and your experiences, because of course, as you guys said, it's extremely important to learn from your guys' mistakes and from our own mistakes to be able to build a better future. So hopefully us united and us standing up for all these injustices would lead us to our main goal, and would lead us to hopefully liberating Palestine and creating a world where there's peace, justice, equality, and just love between all the people. Yeah, thank you guys so much. And it's already like almost 10 p.m. in Palestine, so I'd say good night, but like also good afternoon and everything for all of you everywhere in the world. And yeah, keep spreading awareness, talk about Palestine in every single setting. You get an opportunity to talk about Palestine, resist and never compromise.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jana. Thanks a lot. And we hope to see you in future sessions. So this is the end of this session. I'd like to thank you all for joining. I'd like to thank our guest speakers for joining us. Today in Al-Aqsa yards, 3 Palestinian children were detained for raising the Palestinian flag. The female prisoners are facing ongoing oppression, beating, and humiliation in the cells as we speak right now. 3 of them were in solitary confinement. The male prisoners, the same. They've been facing the same exact situation. The future of Palestinian children depends on a lot of actions. But what we can do is to amplify their voices and tell their stories to the world, tell the crimes of the Israeli offense forces, what they do on a daily basis to make the lives of Palestinians hell. Please take this chance, take this session as a way for all of us to learn more. I hope that we took it as a way for all of us to learn more about what's happening on the ground from the likes of Jana, our Palestinian journalist. And I hope it will also provoke us into taking actions and into telling the world about what's happening in Palestine. Thank you very much, everybody. And we hope to see you in future sessions. Thank you.